They called him the Voice, the Godfather of entertainment, a man who could control Hollywood with a snap of his fingers. But behind the spotlight, Frank Sinatra was truly himself, a man holding the darkest secrets about the century's most beautiful women. Before taking it all to the grave, Frank left behind a shocking blacklist. It wasn't a list of the greatest lovers, but 7 stars he bitterly called truly easy. It wasn't just about physical intimacy. These were women who sold their self-esteem, innocence, and souls for fame or out of extreme loneliness. From the breakdown of Marilyn Monroe, the calculation of Juliet Prowse, to the cruelty of Ava Gardner, prepare to enter Frank Sinatra's memory room, where the Golden Age's mask is peeled off, exposing naked scars history dared not mention. Angie Dickinson, the woman with no strings attached. Under the harsh afternoon sun in Palm Springs, Frank Sinatra stood quietly before an easel in his sunlit studio, no glass of wine in hand. Instead, he held a brush stained with oil paint, an elegant hobby he picked up in his later years to soothe his mind. The sharp smell of paint replaced the scent of liquor, making his mind clearer than ever. He swiped a streak of bright red onto the canvas, and that color suddenly reminded him of another woman on his list, a woman not tragic like Lana Turner, but vibrant, fair, and easy in a way that made men feel both excited and intimidated. That was Angie Dickinson. If Lana Turner was easy due to fear of loneliness, Angie Dickinson was easy because she was too much like a man. Frank remembered filming Ocean's 11 in 1960. Back then, Angie wasn't just a co-star, she was the only woman allowed into the Rat Pack's wild world. Frank squinted out the window, recalling those days with a half smile. Angie possessed the legs dubbed the best in America and a sharp mind. But in romance, she behaved like a guy. She treated intimacy like a handshake, a fun time with no commitment, and that was exactly what put her on Frank's list. Why did Frank call Angie truly easy? He remembered how she entered his life and his friends' lives. Angie didn't demand roses, candlelit dinners, or promises about the future. She came to Frank's room, tossed her coat on the chair, and dove into the fun with naked enthusiasm. But the notable thing was, if Frank was busy or not in the mood that night, Angie wouldn't be upset at all. She would shrug, smile, and maybe go drink with Dean Martin or Peter Lawford right after. To Angie, the men in the Rat Pack were like items on a buffet menu, and she chose freely without feeling any strict moral constraints. Frank remembered asking Angie once if she wanted a serious relationship. Angie laughed, patted his shoulder, and said, "Frank, why complicate things? We're having fun. That's enough." Angie's easiness lay in the fact that she stripped away all romance and possessiveness, the 2 most important spices of love. She was ready to give herself to him, but also ready to give herself to others if it brought joy. Frank admitted, at first, he thought it was great a lover with no strings attached. But gradually, he felt that ease killed a man's instinct to conquer. She was like a door always wide open. Anyone could walk in without knocking. What impressed and haunted Frank about Angie was a freedom that blurred gender lines. During all-night gambling sessions in Las Vegas, Angie was the only woman sitting at the table with the gentlemen, smoking, cursing, and drinking right along with them. When the party ended, who took her back to the bedroom didn't seem to matter. Frank recalled the hollow feeling when he realized that to Angie, he wasn't the voice or an icon. He was just a buddy who was good in the bedroom. Her easiness came from excessive confidence and the hedonistic lifestyle of a modern woman who didn't want to be tied down by any title. There was a memory Frank kept revisiting as he worked on this unfinished painting. It was the morning after a chaotic night of partying. He woke up to find Angie fully dressed, sitting there reading the paper and drinking coffee as if nothing had happened. She didn't demand cuddles or sweet morning nothings. She kissed him lightly on the cheek and left to make her photo shoot. No torment, no lingering attachment. Angie's easy come, easy go attitude made Frank feel superfluous. He realized her easiness wasn't about lowering herself, but about not caring. She didn't need him to define her value, and that bruised Frank's massive ego just a bit. In Frank Sinatra's eyes, Angie Dickinson was the ideal lover for short-term fun, but a disaster for anyone seeking depth. She turned love into a team sport where privacy was erased. He put her on this list not with contempt, but with regret for a woman who had it all: beauty, talent, intellect, but chose to live so openly that she lost the necessary mystery of a woman. She was someone he could call at midnight to go out, but never someone he wanted to call when he needed a shoulder to share his sadness. Frank put the brush down, looking at the red streak on the canvas. It was vibrant and hot, but lonely against the white background. That was Angie Dickinson in his memory, a fire burning fiercely, warming the whole rat pack, but belonging to no one. Her easiness was a power, but also a curse that kept her forever just the shared girlfriend in Hollywood anecdotes, rather than the one true love in the heart of a devoted man. He exhaled, wiped the paint from his hand, and prepared himself to remember the next name, a different woman with a completely opposite kind of easiness, far more calculated and tragic. Lauren Bacall submission in exchange for status. The light in the studio began to fade as the sun slowly set behind the San Jacinto Mountains, covering Palm Springs Valley in a gloomy, deep purple. Frank Sinatra placed the cleaned brush into a jar. The sharp smell of turpentine rose up, replacing the paint smell, evoking a clean but cold sensation. He wiped his paint-stained hands on an old cloth, his eyes accidentally landing on a charcoal sketch lying humbly in the corner. The drawing depicted sharp, proud eyes with the famous upward glance that Hollywood called the look. It was Lauren Bacall, or as Frank usually called her, Betty. Frank stepped out of the studio, leaning against the large glass door, looking out at the still pool. He recalled the late 50s, when Humphrey Bogart, Betty's husband, mentor, and great protector, had just passed away. The world saw a resilient, strong widow, a woman of steel in Hollywood. But Frank, who was by her side during those days, saw a different, naked truth. The moment Bogey died, Betty's armor of pride shattered. She rushed into Frank's arms not out of physical passion, but because she didn't know how to live without a powerful man leading the way. Frank recalled his disappointment when he realized the woman with the signature husky voice and nonchalant attitude on screen became so groveling and submissive in real life. She was willing to lower all her standards, accepting Frank's unpredictability, senseless anger, and even his womanizing, just to stay by his side. Betty's easiness showed in how she tried too hard to be a part of Frank's world. An A-list star, she was willing to play the housewife, the party planner, running around, handling every drink and ashtray for Frank's Rat Pack friends whenever they gathered. Frank said he never had to conquer Betty. She offered herself, placing herself in the position of Mrs. Sinatra, even though he had never officially proposed. She easily accepted a lower status, easily forgave his coldness, as long as he allowed her to appear with him in public. What made Frank feel Lauren Bacall was the worst in this relationship was that she traded her self-esteem for a sense of security. He remembered once, on a tour, he treated her no differently than an assistant, making her wait for hours in a hotel room while he went gambling with friends. A woman of value would have left immediately, but Betty was still there when he returned, smiling and asking if he had fun. That obedience didn't move Frank. It bored him. He realized she didn't love who he really was. She loved the shadow of an alpha male she was used to serving since the Bogart days. She simply transferred her dependence from one man to another. The breaking point was when Betty made her biggest mistake. She let engagement rumors leak to the press. Frank remembered his rage when reading the headline. He realized Betty was too impatient, too easy in believing she could trap him with public pressure immediately. Frank cut off all contact, kicking her out of his life in the most brutal and ruthless way. He didn't accept a woman who cheapened his privacy just to satisfy her desire for status. And the sad part was, even after being dumped, Betty still tried to hold on, still wrote letters, still called. Her easiness in letting go of her pride made Frank despise her even more. Frank turned around, turning off the studio light, leaving the charcoal sketch in the darkness. He had gone through two extremes, Angie's reckless freedom and Lauren's weak dependence. But the list was still long. He remembered another name, a woman whose easiness didn't come from strength or weakness, but from a complete lack of ego, an ice goddess who melted too quickly in the heat of fame. Frank stepped out of the room, preparing to dig into memories of Kim Novak. Kim Novak, the doll with no feelings. A night had completely covered the Coachella Valley, turning the distant mountains into giant black shadows swallowing the light. Frank Sinatra stepped out of the studio, leaving the sharp smell of oil paint behind to welcome the cool night breeze of the desert. He didn't go back to the bar for a drink. The doctor had warned him, and his aging body was starting to protest. Frank walked slowly around the piano-shaped pool, once a symbol of Palm Springs' wildest parties. The still water reflecting the silver moonlight reminded him of a cold, magical, yet pitifully fragile beauty. That was Kim Novak. If Lauren Bacall was easy out of weakness, Kim Novak was easy because she was hollow. Frank stopped, lit a cigarette, the flame flaring up to reveal deep wrinkles on his forehead. He remembered the Kim of the 50s, molded by Columbia boss Harry Cohn to be a second Marilyn Monroe, but classier, colder. The world called her the Ice Goddess, the mysterious blonde in Vertigo. But Frank, who had stripped away that glamorous shell during secret dates, saw a different truth. He put Kim on the truly easy list because she had absolutely no ego. She was like a block of soft clay, ready to shapeshift into whatever a man wanted, just to be loved, or rather, to be validated. Frank recalled their first dates. He had expected a difficult conquest, a haughty resistance worthy of the title Goddess. But no, Kim Novak fell for him so fast, Frank felt let down. Kim's easiness wasn't the freedom of an experienced woman, but the submission of a girl who always felt unworthy. Frank said that beneath that splendid exterior was a Marilyn Pauline Novak, her real name full of insecurity. Always terrified she was a fraud and could be stripped of her crown at any moment. Because of that fear, she became easy with all of Frank's demands. She never dared to say no, never dared to offer her own opinion. She laughed when he laughed, was sad when he was sad, and was as obedient as a beautiful porcelain doll placed wherever he wanted. What made Frank most fed up was the lack of personality in private moments. He recalled Kim often asking silly questions like, "Am I doing this right? Frank, do you like me wearing this?" She didn't live her own life. She was acting the role of Frank Sinatra's lover according to a script she imagined in her head. This easiness carried the color of mental slavery. Kim Novak was ready to erase herself, suppressing her real emotions just to be a perfect ornament beside him, for a man who liked challenges and strong personalities like Frank. Kim's absolute submission was as dull as drinking a glass of water just to get through the day. Frank took a long drag, exhaling smoke into the night. He remembered the event that put an end to this relationship, and was also the clearest proof of Kim's cowardly easiness. When boss Harry Cohn discovered their relationship, he flew into a rage, fearing a scandal would ruin Kim's money-making, icy image. Cohn threatened to destroy Kim's career if she didn't end it with Frank. Frank, with his arrogant nature, was ready to confront all of Hollywood to protect his woman. But Kim was not. She let go immediately. Frank remembered Kim's eyes at that final meeting. No struggle, no internal conflict, only fear and resignation. She chose to be the studio's puppet rather than Frank's woman. Her easiness in compromising with power made Frank feel both angry and pitying. He realized Kim Novak never truly belonged to him, and never belonged to herself. She was Columbia's property. She was easy with Frank because he was a big star, but she was even easier with her boss because he held her rice bowl. A woman who doesn't dare to stand up to protect her heart is forever just a commodity passed from hand to hand. Juliet Prowse, the calculated act of obedience. The desert night wind began to blow harder, carrying a dry chill that seeped into the folds of Frank Sinatra's shirt. He shivered, pulled his collar up, and decided to go back inside. Warm yellow light from the living room spilled out, illuminating the expensive Persian rug where Frank once danced spontaneously during wild party nights. His steps paused when he saw a pair of old dancing shoes displayed in a glass memorabilia cabinet. It evoked memories of a pair of legs the longest. Most beautiful legs Hollywood ever produced. And their owner was the fourth name on the list of easy women, Juliet Prowse. Frank sat down, lit a fresh cigarette, the smoke hovering as if carrying him back to the set of Can-Can in 1960. Back then, Juliet was only 23, a South African dancer with exquisite technique and a fiery body that made every man turn his head. Frank admitted he was captivated immediately. But then, very quickly, the initial infatuation turned into suspicion, and finally, disdain. Frank remembered how she entered his life without hesitation. Juliet wasn't like other innocent girls. She was smart and knew exactly what she wanted. And what she wanted wasn't just Frank Sinatra's heart, but the massive launching pad named Mrs. Sinatra. Juliet's easiness lay in her readiness to bend herself to every mold Frank set. Frank was known as a patriarchal man who liked control. He hated women smoking. He hated women too focused on careers. He wanted his wife to be a solid support system. And Juliet, an ambitious dancer on the rise, nodded in agreement to all those unreasonable conditions, way too smoothly. Frank recalled the night he proposed. He tested her. He said if they married, she had to give up dancing, limit public appearances, and become a family woman. Frank expected resistance, a spark of anger from an artist who loved her craft. But no. Juliet smiled and said, "Whatever you want." Frank. That easy agreement didn't make Frank happy. On the contrary, it chilled his spine. He realized she didn't love him enough to sacrifice everything. She was executing an investment. She accepted trading her current career for a higher position, becoming the wife of the King of Hollywood. Her easiness in abandoning her own passion for power was what made Frank feel cheapened. During their short engagement, Frank observed Juliet more closely. He saw her change her dressing style to suit him, change her way of speaking, even change her laugh to please his Rat Pack friends. She was too perfect, too obedient, and too easy. She was like a chameleon ready to change color, to blend into the powerful environment around him. Frank asked himself, where is the stubborn, fiery South African girl on stage? She had vanished, giving way to an obedient doll, and for a man who had seen too much deception like Frank, that calculated obedience was scarier than betrayal. Frank said the peak of his boredom was when he realized Juliet was using her relationship with him as a first-class ticket. She easily accepted interviews, easily appeared in newspapers as Frank Sinatra's fiancée rather than a talented dancer. She enjoyed the reflected glory from him too naturally. Her easiness was an easiness with fame. She didn't mind people talking as long as her name was placed next to his in big headlines. That marriage never happened. Frank called it off abruptly, shocking all of Hollywood. People speculated all sorts of reasons, but only Frank knew the truth. He couldn't marry a woman whose submission he could buy with his fame. He wanted a partner, not a fan or an opportunist hiding in the shadow of love. Juliet Prowse played a big hand. She bet all her self-respect and career on Frank. But she forgot that Frank was the most seasoned gambler in Las Vegas. He saw through her cards before she could even turn them over. Frank stubbed out the cigarette in the ashtray, his eyes sad but firm. Juliet Prowse was an excellent dancer. He didn't deny that. But in romance, she was an easy woman because she cheapened her own value before the magic of power. She was willing to sell her artistic soul to buy a diamond ring. And to Frank, that was a losing transaction from the start. Mia Farrow innocence to the point of thoughtlessness. The glass of cold water in Frank Sinatra's hand had started to sweat, droplets rolling down the glass and falling onto the expensive carpet. But he didn't bother to care. His eyes were glued to the empty space of the large living room, where more than 30 years ago, a girl with hair cropped short like a boy's and wide, bewildered eyes had walked into his life like a strange breeze. That was Mia Farrow, if Juliet Prowse was mature calculation. Mia Farrow was easy to the point of naivety. The abandon of a white sheet of paper never stained. And that was exactly what made Frank feel the most remorseful. Frank recalled 1966. He was 50 then, an old man in the eyes of the rebellious youth generation, while Mia was only 21, fragile as smoke. Why did Frank put Mia on this dark list? He wasn't talking about bedroom affairs. He was talking about how she handed her life to him. She nodded to becoming his wife so fast, Frank was startled. No hesitation, no thought about the age gap, no care for the vast difference in lifestyle. She came to him as easily as a child accepting candy from a stranger, with absolutely no defense mechanism. That easiness, to a seasoned man like Frank, was initially a stroke to his aging ego, but later it became a psychological burden. Frank said living with Mia was like living with a creature from another planet. While he was used to sharp suits, Jack Daniels dinners, and the unwritten rules of the underworld, Mia walked barefoot, meditated, and talked about world peace with a face innocent of all sin. Mia's easiness lay in her lack of opinion. She let Frank decide everything: what to eat, where to go, who to meet. She sat obediently beside him at dinners with powerful men whose conversations she didn't understand. She was like a beautiful porcelain doll Frank could carry around to show off that he still had enough charm for the younger generation. But deep down, he knew that submission wasn't the sacrifice of a wife, but the emptiness of an immature child. What made Frank feel Mia was bad in her own way was her shallowness in commitments. She easily loved him, easily married him, but was also easily swept away by new things. When the hippie movement and the new cultural wave hit, Mia was sucked in like a moth to a flame. She chopped off the long, silky hair, the thing Frank loved most, to chase the Vidal Sassoon short hair trend. When Frank got angry, she just opened those big, innocent eyes, looking at him as if he were an eccentric old relic. She didn't understand why he was mad. To her, everything was light. Everything was chill. Her easiness in changing herself and chasing trends made Frank realize he could never hold her. She was like a handful of sand. The tighter he squeezed, the more she slipped out. The climax of the conflict was when Mia took the role in Rosemary's Baby. Frank demanded she quit the role to be with him, just as he had demanded of other women. He thought she would easily nod like always. But this time, her easiness shifted toward art and rebellion. She chose the movie, chose Roman Polanski over her husband. She did it not with the fierceness of a woman fighting for her career, but with a calmness that was cold. She simply drifted with a new, more attractive current. Frank retaliated by sending divorce papers right to the movie set, right in front of the whole crew. It was a cruel act, he admitted. But it was the reaction of a hurt man realizing he was just a stopover in a young girl's life. Frank took a sip of cold water, a freezing sensation running down his spine. Mia Farrow wasn't a corrupted woman, but she was an easy woman because she lacked the weight of connection. She loved easily, married easily, and left just as easily. She had no anchor to hold herself against life's waves. Frank blamed himself for being too arrogant to think he could keep a child with his aura. Marilyn Monroe, the pitiful public commodity. Frank Sinatra's large living room sank into silence, only the ticking of the second hand tapping a steady rhythm into the stifling space. Frank sat motionless on the velvet sofa, holding no drink, but his mind was drunk a drunkenness of guilt. He had just walked through memories of Mia Farrow's innocence, but the next name appearing in his mind carried a terrifying weight. That was Marilyn Monroe. If the previous women were easy due to personality or ambition, to Frank, Marilyn was the easiest because she had completely lost the ability to defend herself. She was a fortress with no guards, where anyone could walk in, take something, and leave without looking back. Frank remembered the summer of 1962, just weeks before Marilyn passed away. She came to his Cal Neva Lodge by Lake Tahoe. It wasn't a vacation, it was an escape. Frank said Marilyn back then was no longer the radiant sex symbol on magazine covers. She was a chaotic mess of sedatives, hard liquor, and panic. Why did Frank put her on this dark list? Because he witnessed her heartbreaking easiness before the powerful men in politics and the mafia he had introduced. Marilyn didn't know how to say no. She believed her only value lay in pleasing men, and if she stopped doing that, she would become meaningless. In Frank's memory, Marilyn's easiness didn't evoke lust, but extreme pity. He recalled nights at Cal Neva when Marilyn stumbled through parties, eyes glazed and smile crooked. She was ready to fall into the arms of anyone who reached out to catch her, whether it was a mob boss or a lowly bodyguard. She gave her body like a free gift, a public item everyone had the right to use, Frank admitted. There were times he felt like a terrible broker watching his little sister being passed from hand to hand in debauched parties. He wasn't strong enough to stop it, or rather, he was also part of that cruel machine. What haunted Frank most was the final phone call. Marilyn called him with a tone half joking, half desperate, asking if he wanted to marry her. Frank refused. He knew he couldn't save someone drowning in the ocean. He feared he would be pulled down too. Marilyn's easiness in begging for love from him, a friend. A brother figure was the final cry for help of a dying soul. She sought a lifebuoy. But Frank pulled his hand back. He realized her easiness wasn't a promiscuous nature, but a reflection of terrible loneliness. She would rather be used than be abandoned. Frank looked into the empty space in front of him. The image of Marilyn in a stark white dress appeared like a ghost. He remembered how she wore heavy makeup to hide the dark circles and haggardness. She always tried to smile, that industrial smile Hollywood programmed for her, even when her heart was shattering. Marilyn's easiness was the easiness of a broken doll. People played until bored, then threw it away. But she still tried to crawl back, hoping someone would pick her up again. She had no self-esteem, because Hollywood stripped it away long ago. Marilyn's death was the highest price for that easiness. Frank bitterly admitted that all the men who passed through her life, including himself, were accomplices. They enjoyed her sweetness, her submission, but when she needed them most, they all turned their backs. Marilyn Monroe was the easiest woman in the world, not because she wanted to be, but because she had no other choice. Ava Gardner, the most ruthless promiscuity. The needle scraping the vinyl created crackling sounds before the sorrowful melody of "I'm a Fool to Want You" rang out, filling the large living room with Frank Sinatra's own voice from his youth. He stood leaning against the record player, eyes closed, letting every lyric seep into his aging flesh. No need for alcohol. This song was enough to make him drunk. a drunkenness of a wound that never healed. This was the song he wrote for her, the last woman on the list, and the only one he dared not call prey, because before her, he was the one being hunted. That was Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner's easiness carried the color of cruelty. She treated intimacy and loyalty as light as a feather. Frank recalled nights driving frantically around Los Angeles looking for her, calling every hotel, every bar, while Ava was nonchalantly drinking and having fun with another man. When Frank found her, instead of apologizing, she just looked at him with sharp emerald eyes and said, "I belong to me, Frank, not you." That sentence, along with her reckless attitude, tore Frank's pride to shreds. He realized Ava was easy because she had no concept of possession. She gave her body to anyone who brought excitement in that moment, considering it the absolute freedom of a wild beast refusing to be tamed. Frank admitted, Ava was the female version of himself, but at a more terrifying level. If Frank womanized to assert male power, Ava womanized because she despised constraints. She drank him under the table, cursed better than him, and fought him fist for fist without hesitation. Her easiness was a weapon to balance power in the relationship. She didn't need Frank to grant her status. She was Ava Gardner, and that was more than enough. Frank remembered when she aborted their child without discussing it with him, just because she felt the child would hinder her career and her fun. The ease in rejecting her own flesh and blood to keep personal freedom was the deepest knife Ava stuck in Frank's heart, making him bleed until now. In Frank Sinatra's eyes, Ava Gardner was the most naked definition of modern promiscuity. She didn't need men's money. She didn't need fame. She just needed satisfaction. And so, she became easy with her desires. She didn't know restraint, didn't know sacrifice. Frank had once loved that wildness, but it was also what destroyed him. He realized he couldn't keep a woman who woke up every morning asking herself, "Who will I sleep with today to feel happy?" She turned the sacred love Frank worshipped into a cheap game of chance. The music from the record player faded and then stopped, returning absolute silence to the room. Frank opened his eyes, staring into the void. He had gone through the list of 7 names, from weak Lana, reckless Angie, groveling Lauren, hollow Kim, calculated Juliet, innocent Mia, desperate Marilyn, to ruthless Ava. Each had a different style, but all shared one thing in Frank's notebook: they all easily lost their core value for different reasons in this glamorous but rotting place called Hollywood. Who do you think, among the 7 names Frank Sinatra just exposed, is the one truly deserving of pity? And who is the most blameworthy? Leave your opinion below. Don't forget to click subscribe to join us in uncovering the darkest and most naked romantic files of Hollywood in the next video.